going to do post-production stuff. getIT is what it is.
There you are.
So hoping that there will be lots of interesting people that can help people to get it. And thank you for being the relaunch. I attempted about 2 years ago, and it sort of fizzled out because all of the post-production stuff was just too much, and that's why I decided this time I'm just gonna do it. I'm just gonna wing it. If the people I speak to is interesting enough, it would be interesting enough.
Well,
so first of all,
try.
David Cannett, thank you very much for making time to chat a little bit. And more than that, thank you very much for actually giving me a career. So I was in the late 90s at wit's end and didn't really know what I wanted to do. And a mate of mine said, I need to introduce you. His name was also David. Well, he's still David. Incidentally, he gave a thumbs up when I posted the thing. Said, I must introduce you to this interesting guy called David. They do interesting stuff, and I think it's something that you will enjoy doing. Yeah, and I didn't look back. Unfortunately, we didn't spend a lot of time together because you were on your way out of the country when Mr. Lighteners introduced us. So that was the beginning of a completely different direction of my life. Thank you, sir, and kudos.
No, well, it's just planting seeds, right? And you know what that's about. It's about doing what you think is right, getting out there, putting yourself out there. Some people will like it, some people will not. Yeah. But if you believe it's the right thing and you're passionate about it, then, it's people will see that light in you and in your eyes, and it becomes exciting. I mean, it's I'm just very I'm always very surprised when someone like you says something like that to me, because it's like, and it doesn't happen that often, but it's that's not why we do this, right? We do these things because we believe in them, because we think they would have made our lives better, and we hope that they're going to make someone else's life better. I'm really glad it's working out for you.
Yeah, awesome, brother. Yeah, so it's just a pity that Jürgen says good to catch up. Okay, so I've got Facebook open, I've got LinkedIn open, and I've got StreamYard open. I haven't got YouTube open, so if anybody wants to comment, please do so on Facebook or LinkedIn. Actually, you can do it on YouTube also, because it will feed through to StreamYard. So I think Jürgen has most probably seen you in the flesh as long ago as you left the country. Yeah, isn't it?
That's about right. And I have not seen him in the flesh since I left, and I know he left maybe a couple of years after I did.
Yeah.
So I have not been in his part of the world to actually been able to catch up. So I'm glad to see these names.
I spent a fair amount of time in the Netherlands, so I hope to, or I try to catch up every time that I'm there. Yeah, so, and do you know what the sad thing is that there's so few people who actually do things because they believe in it.
Right.
And it's sad, and it also upsets me.
Well, so Johan, we have each been involved in a lot of development work in the industry from different perspectives. I mean, you were very involved in COVID, and again in Verism, and I have to say, did an exceptionally good job in those things. I've been involved in Untitled, and I think what a lot of people don't realize who who look at the products that we helped or we were part of teams that created. And what a lot of people don't realize is that that is largely a volunteer effort. We don't typically get paid. If we do get paid, it's it's a nominal sum. There are no royalties on this material, right?
It's not equal to the effort.
It's not equal to the effort, and it very often it's a genuine effort to put in the research, to go out and see what organizations are doing, and to learn from that, and to distill that into something that the industry can use. And I think, I don't know about you, but the first time that they asked me to write a part for an Untitled book, I couldn't do a thing for 2 weeks. I could not do a thing because it was just simply, this is such a huge responsibility. I can't take on that responsibility. People are going to read this stuff, and it's got to be accurate. And eventually, I came to the realization, with some help, that this is not actually the absolute truth that you're writing. What you're doing is you're observing, you're reflecting on that observation, you're putting it in writing, and it becomes a platform for discussion, debate. It becomes input into people's thinking, into their decision making, and that's the best you can do. And what is very often discouraging is people look at the work and they imagine that it's done by these people with huge stakes and huge agendas to drive, and a bunch of money that they're going to make off this thing. And it's this framework that they're trying to trap you into, and it's discouraging in a way, because it's anything but that, And I just wish a lot more people, especially those who are developing frameworks, I just wish they would be a lot more open to just listening and hearing what people have to say, especially people with opposing points of view.
Yeah.
Because those opposing points of view came from somewhere, and they're valuable. And if you don't listen to them, you're actually ignoring a reality. Just because you are not part of that reality doesn't mean it doesn't exist. You have to listen. You have to observe. You have to learn. And sometimes that means changing the way you think about something. Yeah. And that's a journey. And I know that is a journey you're on. It's a journey I'm on. And I wish there were more people who were on that journey together with us.
My grandmother used to say, God gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. Use it in that proportion. Shut up. Listen. So the first Untitled book was very operational, and that's, I think, also where you came from. Very operational.
Yeah.
How did you land up, doing the update of the second strategy book?
Like many things, I would like to say it was a mistake. It wasn't exactly a mistake, but it wasn't far off that, right? So we had written the service operation book, which, as you say, is very operational. It focuses on those things like incident management and event management and things like that. And that is the world I came out of. I was, in fact, a system manager in using VAX VMS back in the day. And my job was operations. It was to keep that thing running. It was to keep it available. It was to keep it stable. And that's the world I understood. And that was what I wrote about in service operation. Well, when that book had been published and the first service strategy book was written, none of us in that community really understood fully what strategy was about. In fact, I would say, speaking for myself, I knew very little about what strategy was about. I'd been on a business course, in university, and that was about the closest I'd come. Being part of a small business, we'd of course define our own strategies, but I didn't think of it in terms of service strategy. So I was very interested to read the book when it came out, and to work with Majid and with Michael. And it was an extremely interesting book. There was a lot of really valuable things in there. The only difficulty was it was the first time anybody had done this. So there were a lot of pieces that kind of were here and there and everywhere. And it was kind of being written it was a lot of pressure from a time point of view. So there was a lot that was kind of put together. And so, for example, in that first book, if you wanted to read about the service portfolio, you had to go to maybe 3 or 4 different places in the book. There were a couple of pieces which were very new in the industry, and people didn't relate to them very well. So when it came to the next revision, they said, we need somebody who has experience in writing ITIL books, but is fairly new to the game, because we want to write the strategy book. It is a fairly new area. So we want somebody with a little bit of fresh thinking, but who is still steeped in the ITIL way of thinking. They don't have to create anything from scratch. They just have to kind of rewrite things so that they fit a little bit better. Well, I didn't want to do that job. I applied for the job of mentoring the person who was going to write the service operation book. And I didn't get that job. And I was really, really disappointed. I mean, I had said, you know what, I'm good enough to write the book, but I'm not good enough to mentor the person who's going to take it on from me. Well, okay, fine. Then I'm not good enough, right? Well, it turns out they had this grand plan. They just didn't tell me about it, that they wanted me to do the strategy book. And to be honest, the biggest thing I had to do in that strategy book was to understand. It was to learn. It was to rewrite it in a way that told a story that people who had not been exposed to strategy before could really understand, while at the same time also including all of those concepts that experienced people in strategy could relate to and see, yes, this makes a lot of sense. So it was a huge learning curve for me. And very fortunately, at the time, I had a contract working in a company up in Cleveland, in Ohio. And I worked there for about a year. I was working at HP at the time, and I got this contract. And they said, we need some help in our service management program. And one of the big things that we're looking at is how to define services and how to map those services and how to make sure that the business understands the value of those services and so on, which is really all about the theme of the service strategy book. So as I was writing, and they were very kind, they allowed me to spend a couple of days a week there just writing the book, and the other 2 or 3 days a week, then I was working for them. So it was kind of a part-time engagement, but instead of going home in between my working days, I was sitting in the office and writing books and speaking to people there and interviewing them. And what I ended up doing was testing a lot of the stuff I was writing about. Yeah. And it was really cool because you could see some of these ideas coming to life. You knew they worked because you'd seen them in other organizations, but you'd never had a chance to actually start them from scratch and actually implement them. And a lot of the things you read about in that service strategy book were actually things that we tried out, that we tested, and they really worked well. So that was the first one. And then the digital and IT strategy book, I guess by that time, people realized that I knew something about strategy. Now, I want to stress, I am not the world's leading expert on strategy. There are professors and authors that have been writing for many years about the subject of strategy, and they are just absolutely amazing. The insights that you learn from people who have been studying strategy for years and years and years is absolutely amazing. But when it comes to applying strategy into a digital world, digital is emerging. It's changing as we speak. And to apply that rich history of strategy into that world, that is unique. It's very, very different, and it requires a different way of thinking. It challenges the existing thinking of both strategy and technology management. And I have to say, I'm not the expert on strategy. However, when you look at it, anybody who would have had to write that book would have been in the same position as me, and that is the position that you had to learn as you wrote. Yeah. And that's pretty much how it went. We had a team of authors. There were 7 of us from all kinds of different organizations, some practitioners, some trainers, some consultants. And I have to tell you, those discussions on those calls was just, something every one of us walked away from those calls and said, I have learned so much from the other people on this call. Anyway, long answer to
So-
a very short question. Sorry.
Remember, we always used to joke and say you can if you want to learn do. If you want to learn more than teach. I want to tell people, if you want to learn a lot, start writing.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Because then
Yeah.
then you need to not only try the things out. You need to research. You need to double check. You need to validate. And I think that customer was very smart to actually give you that time, because they got the bargain on the deal.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm always very grateful to them. I know they're very grateful to me. They took what they learned. It was so interesting. We basically experienced the whole thing together. The first time around, we said, we're going to try this out. We're going to learn as we go. Well, we learned as we went. We tried this out in one particular scenario. It was like, if you like, a pilot that we did. And that pilot took us a few months. I want to say it was probably about 6 months in total that the pilot took. And this pilot was all about how you define a service or a set of services, and how you use that definition to improve your relationship with your customer, and how you get to understand your customer's business, and how you get to understand their strategy, the risks they face, and so on and so forth. How you then reflect that back into IT and the whole thing. We did that just with one customer and a handful of services, and it took us 6 months. In the next 6 months, they applied that lesson and actually covered the whole of their SAP. And this is a manufacturing organization, so this is a significant part of the organization. Covered the entire SAP portfolio. Of all of and that took them 6 months based on what they learned in the first 6 months. And that was really gratifying, because I wasn't involved in the second 6 months. And it was really good to see that they had actually, together we had learned something new, and they were able to go and apply that and didn't need me to apply it. That was very gratifying. So, yeah.
I must just say, the first book was interesting, a little bit academic. But this whole issue of the portfolio sitting at the center of the doing bit of strategy was, for me, a really good lesson. And virtually all of the work that we do on a strategy level or a strategic level at the moment, at the core of that is some form of a portfolio.
Absolutely right. And again, it's to me, having been through this now, I cannot imagine actually being a service manager or any kind of technology manager without understanding what the service is that you're delivering. And yet, it seems to be the norm that as long as you have incident management, problem management, and change management in place, you don't actually have to worry about the outcomes and the actual services that are being delivered, because somebody else is doing that. Somebody else is defining what the outcomes are. Somebody else is defining what the service is. All you have to do is make sure that the infrastructure and the applications are working properly. And it's amazing to me that even now, almost 30 years into ITIL, we still are struggling with that basic concept that before you think about the stability of your infrastructure and the development of your applications, you have to understand what it is that a particular business unit needs to achieve.
Yeah.
And so we have a look at service catalogs. Now, I'm generalizing here. Of course, there are thousands of people who've got it right, but there are also thousands of people who haven't. And in those cases, you look at the service catalogs that they have. Number one, they're not service catalogs. What they are is they're request catalogs. We look at the requests in those catalogs. They're not actually services. They are activities or jobs that department wants you to use a front end to engage with them. They're not delivering a service. They're actually just doing their job. But they want you to use a service request mechanism to trigger them doing their job. And they've confused that in some cases with the concept of delivering a service that achieves business outcomes. And, look at some of these request catalogs, and it's just like,
it's silly.
imaging a new laptop, well, that's a service we provide. Guaranteed, nobody in the business thinks that imaging a new laptop is a service that IT provides.
Yeah.
You know, and yet that's the first thing that's on this that is on the service catalog. Yeah.
Yeah. You know, there's two things that you mentioned that just triggered some thoughts. Peter Drucker said there's nothing as useless as doing efficiently that which should not be done at all. And I think there's a ton of things that many of these service managers are doing really, really well. Yeah.
Yeah.
They're doing them by the book, but it doesn't matter. And then the other thing that I just want to leave with you is this. Most people don't know that. Oh man, what's the man's name? Guy that talked about drills and holes.
Yes, actually.
Marketing myopia. He's actually the father. He's actually the father of the concept of jobs to be done. And I can't tell you how much time we're spending lately with customers to help them to understand the jobs that their customers is doing, so that their services can, or their products can form part of the complete offering.
Yeah.
And the co-creation of value. Yeah.
You're right, Johan. Absolutely right. It's a basic. It's an absolute basic, but it's almost as if it's so basic that we assume that it should already have been done, and therefore, why are we wasting our time going back and doing that again? And you know, it's. I remember I was in a presentation on one of my travels back then, and I talked about the concept, a very simple concept of service mapping, so that you could help people in the back office to understand what was going on in the front office. Right. So you have a bunch of business people working out there, and you have a bunch of IT people working in the back office, and they don't speak to each other. Somewhere in the middle, there's a developer, right? And they're sitting on the mountain, and they see both sides of the mountain, and for them, it's obvious, right? This is what we developed. This is what the business uses it for. This is what the operators must do. It's obvious. But the people sitting on either side of the mountain can't see each other. They don't know what each other are doing. And the developer at that stage has now moved on to another project. So he or she is not there anymore. So what's left is this residual of, well, this was what was developed, therefore that is what I have to do. And nobody ever goes back to revisit this until, of course, there's a major change request or a major change. And I'm going back a few years, of course. And I articulated this concept. And one of the CIOs on the stage with me said, this is too simple. So this will never work. It is too simple. Surely the job of IT is more complicated than this. Well, I need to tell you, but that leader was not there when I went back a year later.
Yeah. So, but is IT that complicated? I mean, don't we over complicate?
Oh, we absolutely do. We absolutely overcomplicate things. I think, for example, let's take the CMDB, something that I was reading the other day. 88% of CMDB projects fail.
I would believe that.
And the reason cited, this was a Gartner study, the reason cited was because the data is too disparate. It's in too many sources. It is too diverse. And anyway, by the time you've cleaned it and deduplicated it and, you know, put it up there, it's out of date. And they're absolutely right. And then I have to ask, but why? Why is this data from so many different sources and in so many different formats and so on? Going back to the service strategy experience that I had with that company up in Ohio, what we did is we took what we learned about that service and that customer, and we redesigned the CMDB to reflect how that service was structured. A couple of things happened. Number one, the complexity of their CMDB decreased by about 60%. They were storing things in the CMDB that they really didn't need to be worried about. You know, serial numbers and asset records and all kinds of things on stuff that they didn't even touch. It was in the database. They really, to manage those services, needed to have their hands on only about, I think it was 8 components. That was it. It's all they needed to be worried about. The rest of it, They needed to know it was there, but they really didn't need to be managing and controlling it at that level. So their CMDB really simplified a huge amount. And the second thing that happened, because it was so simple, they knew exactly where to get the data, and they knew exactly what they were going to use that data for. It wasn't just, well, let's suck this data in and maybe one day we'll find a use for it. It was, look, we need this data because we have to know when this user does this activity. So, and we're going to get that. And this is where we're going to get it. And this is how we're going to use it. And that was it. And that CMDB for those services was always up to date. It was always useful. And it was simple. So I agree with you. It is a lot more simple than we think it is.
I'm most probably going to be stoned for this, but the best CMDBs that I've seen, spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Do you know why? Because you can't make it complex. You can't have 17,000 different layers of information. But how many pages or how many sheets can you link dynamically? It just becomes too complex. So I mean, what's the things burning you, or all that is going to burn you? Yeah, and I keep on getting back to, I don't know if you can remember that picture from sort of the SLA to the OLA to that eventually it ended up in the configuration management database.
Yep.
That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah.
Why do you want to have all this other weird stuff? FSMA roles. Who gives a shit? Yeah. The guy who cares about a FSMA role needs nowhere to get that data. Why does it have to be in your database?
Correct.
Stupid.
Correct.
It is just silly.
Yeah, I know it is. We've way overcomplicated this. And by the way, you mentioned SLAs. The latest trend now is an SLA means a metric. It's no longer an agreement that you have with your customer. What it is simply a target. It's like, are all of your changes done on time? That's now an SLA. It's not, hey, you need this service, and here's why you need it, and here's what we're going to do to deliver it to you. And if we don't deliver it, then this is what needs to happen. So I'm starting to see the term SLA being used, and I think where it comes from is tools.
Yeah, it's the RGBs that everybody is looking at.
Right, and so an SLA then just becomes...
not RGB, RAG.
Yeah, the RAG. Red, amber, green. For those in America, red, yellow, green. So, that's what it is. It's like, okay, so in your incident management, you need to enter an SLA. And your SLA is, I have 3 hours to respond to this incident. It's not an SLA. That is a performance target, and that is something completely different. And we in the haste to do what you call doing things more efficiently, we're actually losing a lot of value, a lot of richness in the language and in
context.
The concepts. Yeah,
it's about context.
Yeah.
Understanding is about context. It's not about how much data you've got.
Absolutely. It's strange though. It's strange you say that, because one of the big things that we're doing right now, every organization is wrestling with this, is this idea of context sensitive intelligence, or automation, I should say, intelligent automation. Infrastructure as code, for example, or integrating artificial intelligence into making decisions or into analyzing situations and this kind of thing. And to be able to do that kind of work, you have to understand that context is more important, or as important as anything else that you're doing. You have to know not only what the variables are, but you have to understand how those variables are likely to change given any decision that you make, and you need to be able to preempt that. It's like kind of a chess game. And so we understand this in the way that we're deploying new technology, but we're not applying it to the things that we have been doing for 20 years. We're kind of trying to reduce those things. It's strange to me. Shouldn't we be using the same level of thinking for the back office as we're using for the emerging technology? Why is it that we're now thinking that the back office stuff is no longer doesn't deserve that kind of attention, doesn't deserve that kind of richness, when in fact, if you think about it, your legacy systems are the things that are what are keeping your organization going. They may not be hot and sexy, but they're critical. They go down, and you're going to lose key things.
Switch them off and
switch them off, right? So exactly. And so, why do we feel that we have to, in the haste to focus on new things, that we have to forget about the disciplines for the old things? And I think this is part of it. I see many organizations assuming, and look, I have to be honest, we are told that the new technology will solve the old problems. I don't know if you remember cloud, right? Yeah, I mean, cloud was you didn't need service management anymore because it was all automated in the cloud, right? Remember that. You didn't have to worry about capacity planning anymore because it was all pay as you go. So you didn't need it, you didn't use it. And it was all supposed to be very self-regulating. And cloud was going to solve all these problems. It turns out, what is one of the top 3 problems that people have when they're implementing cloud? The top 3 is something like, insufficient project planning, the old, insufficient management of change. So people not having the skills and being trained on how to change the way they do things. Third one, inaccurate workload forecasting.
And cost.
Yeah, exactly. Because what happens is you're sitting with a bunch of servers that you have purchased, capital expense. You've developed a bunch of applications on projects, capital expense. That money has gone out of the books. All you're doing is you're spending money on the maintenance. You can do whatever you like with those servers. You can run as much workload as you like. So what you do is you don't measure them. All you do is you check on utilization. As long as it's under 70% or 80% or whatever, you're okay, right? When you move into the cloud, people think they can continue doing whatever they like because it's a free resource. It is not, right? And so if you've been inaccurate about understanding your workloads, and by the way, when I say workload, I'm not talking about how much memory you're using on your server. I'm talking about the fact that there is a group of users who is sitting on an outbound call desk. A marketing campaign has been launched, and suddenly they have a 200% increase on the number of calls they're logging into the system, right? That's a workload. And if you have a 200% increase in the number of calls being logged into the system, guess what's going to happen? On a per transaction rate in the cloud, you're going to be paying for every single one of those. And if you did not anticipate that 200% increase, then your budget is not going to cater for it. And you're going to run out of money because you were not accurate about your workload forecasting. And yet, if I think about it, do you see any organizations in? No, I mean, I'm being sarcastic here. Let me not be sarcastic. How many organizations do you see posting in Facebook and on LinkedIn about the importance of incident and problem management, right? Versus how many people do you see posting on LinkedIn and Facebook about, how they're coming to grips with their workload management and workload forecasting and workload modeling, right?
It seems like the conversation is a Margaret Thatcher conversation. I mean, the stuff that she told, what was it, ITCTCA, whatever that long name was, put in those original books, is still the things that people are talking about. Yeah. So that sort of brings me to the next question. Does strategy matter? If people get by with so little of it. Sorry, being facetious. So.
No, I'll give you a perspective. I'll give you a perspective on this. And I would, of course, given you a long academic answer on this one because, of course, it matters. But okay, here's the perspective. I was sitting in a conference 2 weeks ago. First time here in the States, we're doing face-to-face again. So I'm sitting in this conference, and at the front table are 5 CIOs. And the question around the conference is digital and human. What's your experience? How are you dealing with it in your company? 5 CIOs, 4 of them, and they all agreed on this, said the biggest issue that we have is getting data to people where they are and at the right time, and the right data. And so when we're talking about digital and human, the problem that we face is a data problem. And I have to agree with him. That is a very big problem, and it is something that we struggle with all the time. So every single one of those 4 said, so what we're doing is we have a major project on how to identify what data needs to be where, and we are going for big data. We are looking at ways of getting data from sources, staging it, and then getting it out to the people that need it, and so on and so forth. That is our biggest driver within the organization. The 5th CIO said, I am the CIO for an ice manufacturing company. This is a big thing in the States, by the way. For those of you not in the States, making ice is a really important deal, right? We
So
buy
you can
ice.
sell ice to Eskimos.
I guess so. But ice here, every supermarket, every gas station has a freezer, and you go and you buy big things of ice, and it's a big deal. And so she says, I work for an ice manufacturing company. Says, I have one issue and one concern as a CIO. I need to understand what the level of ice is in every freezer that we supply. I need to know how quickly it's being sold so that I can get the trucks with ice to refill those freezers in time. And I need to be able to get that information to the factories so that they can get their production rates right in real time. That's my problem. That is what I'm focusing on. There's no talk about, we have a data project, we have an IoT project, we have this kind of thing. And of course, once you drill down, she has all of those things, right? She has an IoT project, she has a data project, she has a GPS or positioning, beaconing tool. She has all of those, and those are all projects. But in her mind, it's one thing. You look at the other CIOs, and what they have is a bunch of needs being expressed by their users and a bunch of projects to respond to those needs. That's the importance of strategy for me, right? And so if you don't have a strategy, then what you do have is your strategy becomes the sum of all of your projects. Now you start to understand why in those organizations, they have a problem funding their legacy systems. Because legacy systems are not working in projects. They're not project work. They're not project work, right? They're just ongoing, repeatable processes. You look at the ice manufacturing company, guaranteed that there is funding for those legacy programs for those legacy systems, because they are used for manufacturing control. Without those legacy systems working at the right time, in the right way, they're not going to be able to produce the ice when they need to produce it. And so to that CIO, the strategy is, I need to look at both the project work and I need to look at the business as usual ongoing operations management processes in exactly the same light, with the same degree of focus and importance. And that's the importance of strategy for me. So, by all means, you don't have to have a strategy. You're absolutely right. By all means, you can continue to respond every time a business user says they need something. And you can continue to drive your project portfolio and believe that you are doing exactly what it is that the business needs while you watch your back office falling apart. Yeah. And, I was working in an organization this last week. Sorry, I'm just going to tell you the result of this. Working in an organization last week who is sitting with probably about 20% of their desktops are older than 10 years.
Okay, and it's still working.
It's still working, but it's not going to work for much longer because the business is not prepared to fund the refresh program. Okay. Why? Because there's no project for it, right? And it's still working, but there's no plan for what happens when those start failing. And the reason for that is because they're budgeted as a back office expense. They're not part of any project. There are a bunch of really, really cool projects that this organization is working on. But none of those projects require a refresh of the end user device. And therefore, there is no funding for the refresh of end user devices until those things start to fail. And then there is going to be panic buying like you can't believe.
Yeah, and what's the consequences? What's the cost to the company? What's the cost to the customer? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, so yeah, no wonder our what's the word that I'm looking for? We sit with so much technical debt in organizations.
Yeah, no, it's
not
exactly
only in
right.
IT; it's across the organization. Yeah, I've started when I teach people about agility and agile and all that stuff. I say to them, stop funding projects. Fund your products.
Absolutely.
And for me, a product and a service is the same. Yeah,
absolutely. And every product is going to have a mix of new things and existing things, and things that have to be retired. And and you have to manage them the same. And I always get a kick out of this. I love people who are focused on the projects and who are working in projects because they're so hot, right? And they are the coolest thing that ever come out of there. What they don't know is that in 3 years' time, they are the legacy. Because that's the rate of change right now. The rate of change is that what you're working on today in 3 years' time will be a legacy system. And in fact, that's decreasing. So it may even be next year. And so you may think, if you're in that position, if you're on the front end and you are working on these cool projects, then one or two things is going to happen. Either you have to keep your knowledge current and keep moving and changing your specialization to focus on the emerging technology, which keeps changing, or you're going to be in the legacy and you're going to be in the back office. And so that's fine. It's important to be in the back office, but there are a lot of organizations that do not value back office work. And you're right. Focus on the product, right? Because when you focus on the product, then you have a really good understanding of what your capabilities are and whether you need to develop them from scratch or whether you need to use something that existing. You start to really value what you have and how to use it better. But yeah, again, we still have not got over, for as much as we talk about this, we have not got over the divide between development and operations. We call it different things these days, but we're still there. We still have this divide in organizations, and it's not healthy.
Yeah, I mean, my facetious comment now was really about, I don't know, IT strategies. About 99% of them is actually IT tactics.
It is, yeah.
And I would venture to say a good 70% of business strategies is also tactical. It doesn't talk about the big picture questions, the why.
Well, that's a good point. And you think about a so-called digital organization, right? This is an organization that is using technology as a way of doing new business or building up their business capabilities. They're of course not purely technical, but they're heavily focused on digital technology. You have to ask yourself, how many of those projects are being driven because the vendor came up with a new piece of functionality versus how many of them are driven because that business actually sat down and strategically said, we need to be here in 2 years' time. And to do that, we need this digital capability. Let's go and find out where it is. It would be interesting.
Even better, where's my customer going to be in 2 years?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. And is there a solution that would help us meet them where they are in 2 years' time? And if it doesn't exist yet, are we going to innovate it? And to me, that's more strategic thinking. This idea that, hey, suddenly the vendors have come up with this great new functionality. How can we use it? Right? That's not strategic. It is a strategy, I guess, of some kind, but it's not very strategic.
Yeah, but that's making new drills. And yes, the drill may be more efficient in terms of making the hole.
Yeah.
But if it's the wrong size hole, who cares?
Right.
Yeah. David, I said I won't take too much of your time, but there's still a bunch of things that I want to ask you.
Well, let's talk. I'll keep my answers short.
No. I mean, I'm quite happy to go for 3 hours. I don't have an issue with it. I listen to Joe Rogan podcasts, so I don't mind. What is the best read you've had? And it can be anything, yeah? So fiction, non-fiction, in the last 5 years.
Oh my goodness. Gee, a bunch of stuff. I'm just looking across at my bookshelf. So I have to say I've done a whole lot of reading as research. What are a couple of things that have really struck me recently? Now you put me on the spot. It's like asking, what is your favorite movie? It's like, when people ask me that, I have no idea how to answer that question because I have quite a few, just depending on when you catch me. That's it.
Okay, for me, it's quite easy. Kelly's Heroes.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. That reminds me. So one of the books that I really enjoyed probably about 2 years ago was a book of the history of the SAS.
Okay.
I really enjoyed that book. It was, of course, we at our age, we kind of grew up in the post-Second World War era. The war was very fresh. I mean, I didn't realize it. Growing up, I was born 18 years after the end of the war. And that sounds like a very long time when you're a teenager. But at this age, I now realize how close we were to it. And so a lot of our thinking was informed by, those events and the culture that emerged from the returning veterans and so on and so forth. And so those kind of stories were still very interesting. I still find stories about the Second World War very interesting. They inform a lot about where we came from, our generation. I would say I'm sort of just past the baby boomer stage. I kind of, if you're young enough, you'll call me a boomer. If you're older, you'll say you don't qualify. I'm sort of in that in-between stage, but it really informs a lot. And this book about the history of the SAS was really interesting to me because, we talk about strategy. There really wasn't a strategy. And how these guys emerged, it was special services, right? Their job was to get behind the lines and just cause chaos and just take out key things. And they started in North Africa and they developed and they eventually became this really, the state-of-the-art fighting unit. And they're legendary in how they developed. But when you think about it, how they started was a bunch of people just kind of, almost daredevils in a way, just not happy with the way things were being done, not feeling comfortable with the hierarchies and authority structures, understanding they needed to operate within a structure, but still didn't personally really appreciate that too much. Had some very special skills and some weird outlooks in life, came together and did this thing. And it was just really interesting how it crackpot idea, some captain came up with this idea. Hey, what if we do this? And Winston Churchill heard this and said, okay, we'll give it a shot. And off it went. So that was really cool. So what did you enjoy about Kelly's Heroes? That's always a good one.
No, I don't know. I just watch it every year. I don't know why. But it's one of those things. Actually, there's a few things that I watch every year. I listen to Seven Habits of Highly Effective People on what's its name every year because I need to remind myself of things. I watch both series of Faulty Towers every December, and including all the Black Arrows. I watch the Matrix trilogy every year. I watch Kelly's Heroes every year. I don't know why, but yeah, I just do. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm with you. So my favorite is a good spy thriller. Okay. So movies, I will watch this once a year. Is the Bourne series?
Okay.
Love
So
those.
incidentally, I think Monday, the second series of Biohackers was coming out. I don't know if you watched the first one on Netflix. It was brilliant. It is scary as hell, but it is brilliant. So absolutely must watch. Yeah. Okay. So if and a little bit more serious business wise, or your job wise.
So yeah, a few things. What I did last year during the pandemic, something very interesting is I put myself through a digital marketing course.
Mm-hmm.
And I did a bunch of reading around that, and that was something that was really, really interesting for me. Now it sounds a little bit strange. Why would an IT service management guy go and read go and put himself through digital marketing? Well, partly because there was no face-to-face, right? So you had to do things digitally, and we were just starting our company and we were getting going. So we had to figure out how this digital thing worked. And then partly, this was also about the time that the digital and IT strategy book was being finished. And one thing that I learned through this course, and all of the books that I read through this course, is that when you start doing something digitally, it's not the same as the things you were doing before. I know that sounds like a common sense statement, but think about it this way. Most people, when they talk about automation and they talk about digital, they talk about, we're going to continue doing the things we were doing before, but we're just going to use technology to do it. Well, when you talk about digital, that's not true. When you start using digital, you're actually not doing the same things you were doing before. You're actually starting to do different things, and you're doing them in different ways. So it's not just about, digital is not about automating stuff that you were doing before. It includes that, but it's about changing the rules. So and this is really key for me to understand, is that when you talk about digital, you're not talking about you doing something different. You're talking about your customers doing something different, right? You're talking about the society that you work in being different. Now sustainability starts to take on a whole new thing. And so I started reading a little bit about sustainability, not the sustainability of, green IT, which is important, but there's more to sustainability than green IT. And that is, I have a business, and that business is situated in a fast-changing environment. That environment is social, it is political, it is economic, it is environmental, it's all of those things. And if I'm not careful, if I don't keep up with the changes in those environments, I will go out of business. And that's what digital is about, right? It's about if you can't figure out where your customers are going, how the rules of society have changed, you're going to go out of business. And by rules of society, I mean, this becomes crazy. It's like, for example, public shaming. People on Twitter, they make a bad comment, inappropriate comment, and suddenly the world is on them and they lose their jobs and all of this kind of thing. That rule of society, that's become a thing now, right? You could say anything you liked on Twitter and you were okay. Well, now if you say the wrong kind of things, you're canceled. You're out. You can't even make a living in some cases. The rules of society have changed. Now, what is interesting, I read a book. This is one of the books I read about public shaming, and I forget the name. Public shaming was a thing back in the 1600s. They actually did this, right? And about 16 and 1700s, about the time of the Salem witch trials, they started to realize that it was a bad thing, right? You could actually say something about somebody that wasn't true and you could get them in a lot of trouble. Yeah. And so what the government started doing was to implement laws against public shaming, things like libel and this kind of thing. And so public shaming was stopped it became unacceptable and it was not practiced until Twitter comes along and Facebook comes along and all of these things come along. And all of a sudden, we've gone back 300 years in our behavior, in our societal norms. Now, until such time as we stop this behavior, and there are, of course, there is legislation that is stopping that against cyberbullying and that kind of thing. Until we take action as a society to fix that, you as an organization had better understand that this phenomenon exists. You'd better understand that as you're using social media, you're posting things in a way that relates to the better judgment of your customers in those situations. And so, so when you talk about digital marketing, you're talking about doing things differently. You're not talking about doing the same old marketing using different tools. You're talking about using different marketing. And the same is true no matter what business you're in. Right? It's not just about digital marketing. It's about using artificial intelligence tools in your incident management process, for example. You're not just doing the same old incident management using a new tool. You're actually changing the way in which you're thinking about incidents and problem management. It becomes very different.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a couple of books that I read that were really interesting to me, business-wise. Not the standard kind of business books that you would imagine me reading, but yeah, that was very interesting.
I just cannot help but thinking when you talked about public shaming that the image. I'm a visual person, so the image that came up immediately was Cersei Lannister walking down the street with the bell ringing and the woman saying, "Shame, shame, shame."
Right, exactly. That's what it is. That's exactly what it is. It's just not a little village anymore. Now it's the whole world, right?
Yeah.
So the response to public shaming has been the cancel culture, and that's not healthy either.
No, it isn't.
So,
but I say to people that I believe that all forms of fundamentalism is fundamentally wrong, because it swings and roundabouts. That you don't want to be on the extreme. You want there in the middle. That's where the pendulum should be.
Right, and it will swing again. It lands in a slightly different place every time because it not only swings from side to side, but it's moving, forward and up and down and so on. But it will swing again. Yeah, that's so. Something else I've come back to every now and again. You talk about doing things year after year. There's a series of books that I come back to from a business point of view every once in a while, which is the Theory of Constraints books.
Yeah. So
yeah, and I enjoy those. I like reading the novel ones, not the heavy theory ones. And most people are familiar with The Goal, which was the first one. Yeah. But there are another couple of books which are really, to me, even more valuable than The Goal. The one that I like best is one called It's Not Luck.
Okay.
And It's Not Luck is about how you need to be thinking big picture in your organization, right? So the goal is about removing constraints, right, or bottlenecks.
But very focused, yeah.
Right? Very focused. Like you're on an assembly line, and if one machine is slow, you need to figure out how to make it quicker, kind of thing. And then you see where the bottleneck goes next, and you fix that one, and so on. It's very operational, right? And most people, that to them is what Theory of Constraints is about. It's queuing theory, and it's this kind of thing. But It's Not Luck is a really interesting book, and it's about marketing. Strangely, I'm not a marketing guy, but strangely, this one is about marketing. And It's Not Luck is about understanding that within these bottlenecks and so on, if all you're doing is focusing on the individual bottlenecks and ignoring the big picture, your organization could be in serious trouble.
Yes.
And it talks about how you link. He talks about this concept of global optima versus local optima. Global optima meaning, what does your organization need as a whole to function effectively? versus a local optimum, which is, what can I do to produce the best performance results for my department? So as long as my department is performing well, I'm great. Forget about the rest of the organization. So it's about how do you transfer your focus from this local, doing what's best for you to doing what's best for the organization. And that to me is a really good read. The other one is about
a grand value stream.
It is, yeah. It's very much
whole
about
organization. Yeah.
Yeah, and awesome, interestingly, in that book, he talks about the concept of conflict clouds. A conflict cloud is when you make two sets of assumptions, and they look like they're okay, but actually, at the core of it, when you take them to their logical end, they're in conflict. And he talks about how these conflicts actually lead to you focusing on your area rather than resolving the conflict, so that you can look at the big picture. And I
incidentally, before you go on,
yeah,
on Audible, I don't think it's a book. I think it's only an Audible book. Beyond the Goal, it's sort of recordings of a chat or a few chats of Eli Goldratt. It's brilliant, mate. Go and listen to it. Beyond the Goal.
I absolutely will, because it's and again, if you listen to Goldratt, it is a very, very simple methodology or framework or whatever you want to call it, and yet it is extremely complex when you start. It's one of those things. I always say the most simple things in life are the most complicated, right? Because to get to that, you listen to a piece of music. The pieces of music that we consider the most beautiful are very often the most simple, and yet when you think about the amount of work that it took to get it to that point of simplicity, it's phenomenal. It is incredible the amount of knowledge that composer had to have had, the amount of variables that they had to deal with to be able to produce something that was very simple. And the goal or theory of constraints to me is something like that. When you read the goal, it's not like it looks so simple. It is elegant. It is it's just really it's intuitive. But to get to that point is it covers up, not covers up, it reflects. It's a product of a lot of complexity and a lot of really, really complex thinking. And I'm definitely going to listen to that, because I think I've heard a couple of his speeches, presentations, and there is so much depth behind the simplicity. The third book that I read of his from time to time is a book called Critical Chain, about project management. And all based on theory of constraints, and played with some of the models. You can download these models.
Interesting if you read that and you think about what we're busy doing in Agile. So I've started more and more, when we're talking about business agility and applying Agile principles and whatever, started thinking about those links, those unseen links, and the consequences of the decisions that we make, because we don't see context.
Right. Exactly.
And I'm not saying do more detailed planning. That doesn't solve the problem. It's about understanding the complexity of the system that you're dealing with.
Right. And so go back to strategy. I think I put this in the DITS book. If I didn't, it should be there. But no strategy should be longer than 12 pages. 20 pages. I mean, let's be generous. And yet most of the IT strategies I see, they're like this thick, and they're filled with architecture diagrams. Like I don't understand them. And yet when you think
quite honestly, I don't even understand architecture.
No,
I'll be once again stoned for making that comment.
No, it's one of those hugely complex things, and when architects produce something that's really simple, it's a thing of beauty. When they produce something that is hugely complicated, I certainly can't understand it, and I know that most business users wouldn't understand it. So, for me, an architecture is extremely important, of course, and let's not go that far. Architecture is critical. But it's the mistake we often make is thinking that everybody should see the detailed architecture of every plan that we have. Yeah. And most people don't understand that. It's like you want to go and see a blueprint of the high-rise building that they're building next door. Some of it will make sense to you, but not all of it. The only people that it is designed for, people who are building, and for people who are going to be installing electrical circuits and things like this. That's what blueprints are designed for. And architectures are designed for specific individuals and for specific roles within an organization. To think that you should put an architecture into your strategy document, which is going to be published to all stakeholders, is a mistake in my thinking.
I absolutely agree with you.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I think many architecture artifacts are busy work. They're actually never used. And therefore, why bother?
Right.
Yeah.
And to me,
if they were used, there would have been value. Yeah.
Exactly. The best architectures for me are when all of the stakeholders who are involved in this actually get together in the design and are involved. Because basically, what the architect, whatever diagram you come up with or document you come up with, everybody understands. The value of those documents is the collaboration that happens while producing the document.
Yeah.
Yes, there is value in the document itself, but even more valuable than that is the collaboration that getting different people to see each other's point of view is really valuable.
Douglas MacArthur who said, I can't remember, one of the American generals had said, plans are worthless, but planning is very valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay, so last three questions. What's the future of service management?
We're at a pendulum right now. Right now, the industry is in a state of confusion. And it's in a state of confusion because of a lot of things. One is just the rate of innovation is so high. We have tools that are, again, we talk about artificial intelligence, big data, we talk about machine learning and so on and so forth. We talk about, real-time service provision and service support, context-sensitive support and delivery of services and so on and so forth. And, we're still figuring out what all of that means. Businesses are now starting to take ownership of the task of managing a lot of the technology. A lot of these new technologies are being adopted by product teams who are not necessarily ITSM teams, and that's a good thing. And so, to be honest, there's a lot of confusion about where the industry is going from a technology, from an innovation point of view. You have on the one extreme people saying, IT is more important than ever before because you need specialized skills to be able to, digest and manage these. On the other hand, you say, well, IT is nothing more than a utility. There will be no CIO in 10 years' time because, just like there used to be chief electricity officers back in the day, well, you don't see them anymore because electricity is just something you plug into, and IT will be the same thing. So you have these two kind of extreme views of what IT is going to be. You have people saying there will be IT, but it's not going to be an IT department. It's going to be embedded in the business. So I'm not sure on the answer to that. The thing I've been saying a lot recently, I started saying this about 10 years ago, but it's kind of become more and more important now, which is that for me, the ITSM careers are going to go in one of three directions. You're either going to be in the business, back office, or the cloud. That's where you're going to be in the future. And if you could be in any one, they're all good careers. There's nothing wrong with those. If you're in the business as an IT service manager, then you're pretty much going to be involved in understanding the business itself. You're going to be a digital person, a digitally savvy person who really understands the new rules and who understand how it applies to your business. And my belief is that 10 years ago, and even today, if you're an IT person, you can pretty much work in any organization that has IT. But in future, I think if you're an IT person in a bank, you will only ever be working in banks, because the knowledge to do banking, to use technology to do banking, will become so specialized and so unique to banking, the digital technology in banking. So to a certain extent, I think there is a category of service managers that will be in that category, that you're going to become a technology professional or a banking professional who has a technology specialization. And you will continue to work in that kind of organization. That's the first kind of career. The second career is in the back office, which is basically you're going to continue focusing on those operational activities: incident management, problem management, change management, server administration, all of that stuff. You're going to be working in the back office. And so you talk about getting stoned. That's the thing I'm going to get stoned for, is saying that the service desk is a back office function. Because so many service desks, in fact, all service desks believe, and they're passionate about this, we provide a service to the customer. And they're absolutely right. But they're not the customer. They're not in the front office. They're the bridge between the front office and the back office. And most of the work they coordinate is back office work. It's not front office work. Yeah. So you're going to find if you want your career to be in service desk, and you want it to be in incident and problem management and change management, you're going to find yourself in the back office, which is fine. It's necessary work. It has to be done, but that's where you're going to be. And then the third category is if you're a technical specialist, and you focus on a particular technology, then what's going to happen is that technology over time will become commoditized. And commoditized technologies are put into the cloud. So, if you're a server administrator, increasingly, you will find your job will be provided by cloud service providers. You'll go and work for a cloud service provider to administer servers. Now, to the extent that servers remain in the on-premise environment, you'll keep your job in the back office. But to the extent which your organization is going to outsource that work to the cloud, your job will move to the cloud as well. So to me, that's the future of our careers. As far as the practice goes, or as far as the frameworks go, I would, right now, the second level of confusion is this framework war that seems to be going on, which is, to me, so counterproductive. DevOps is saying that ITIL is deficient. ITIL is saying, DevOps doesn't understand the operational world. I don't even know what Verism says, because Verism is all about bringing everything together. But so I'll ask you about that in a moment. But there seems to be a lot of confusion about which framework should we go for, and will ITIL have a future? Because will DevOps have a future? Will Agile have a future? I honestly don't know. The industry is evolving so quickly that I think what will emerge, and I hope what will emerge, is that organizations in the short term will look at all of the frameworks and say, here are the pieces from that framework that work for us within our context. We're going to use that. I really hate it when someone says, we're an ITIL organization, or we're a DevOps organization. It's so counterproductive, because you're assuming that there is no value in the other framework that is not covered by the framework that you're adopting. And that's just not true. There is value to every framework. And so, to me, I would hope that the future of ITSM is more of a collaborative future between different frameworks. And I would hope that something new emerges from that collaboration. I don't know what form it will take. So,
So
but
you've actually just given the Verism answer.
There you go.
Okay, look at everything, make sense of it, and use whatever works for you.
Right. But do it in a deliberate way. Don't just
fair enough. I mean, so
somebody went on an ITIL course. Now we're going to use ITIL. Somebody went on a DevOps course. Now we're going to use DevOps. No. Let's be conscious about the way we do it. Yeah, isn't that called the management mesh?
Yeah. So what we actually say to people is, understand everything intimately. Understand your context and apply what you've learned. Forget the name. I don't care what you call it.
Absolutely.
Yeah?
Absolutely.
But do the right thing for the business. Yeah.
Right.
And do it across the business, because remember, in Verisum, it's an enterprise view. It's not an IT view.
Yeah.
So you've already sort of answered me one of the other questions. So let me ask you the last one now. Is digital transformation a fad?
Okay. Yeah, let's spend another 3 hours. If it is, it's been a very long fad. So I'm one of those people who believes that we have been digitally transforming for decades. That ever since somebody put that first computer in place, that digital transformation started happening. Was it large scale? No, but it was transformative. It may have transformed some back office activities like finance and so on. But if you think about it, finance, because of computerization, was transformed. Accounting was transformed. Manufacturing has been transformed by the use of ERP and ERM systems. And we didn't talk in the days of accounting or finance systems. And by the way, I've been around for these. We didn't talk in those days of ERP implementations and financial system implementations, and what we used to call integrated information systems. We didn't talk about digital transformation. But if you look at what digital transformation is, that is exactly what happened. Those industries, those organizations were transformed. So in my mind, we've been doing digital transformation for all those years. And therefore, if that's how you define digital transformation, as long as technology keeps innovating, there will be transformation. There will have to be transformation, because, as I mentioned before, when you move to a new technology, you don't just do the old things in a new way. You actually start doing different things. So when you adopt new technologies, it is a transformative thing. The question is whether you're doing it reactively or proactively. So when we talk about digital transformation, what we usually mean is a proactive or a forward-looking, conscious effort to transform some aspect of an organization, versus technology adoption, which is also transformative, but we don't know how it's going to transform us until we've actually adopted the new technology. So is it a fad? Maybe in its current form. Do you remember business reengineering?
Yeah, and much of the bad things of business process reengineering is being repeated. And I mean, Mike Hammer actually in his second or third book said, the reason why business process reengineering doesn't work is because it's not business process reengineering.
Right. He's absolutely right. And I've been through a couple of these as well. And my experience was, people want things to change so they can keep things the same.
Yeah, human nature.
And it's I've been part of these things where people are adamant, we're going to change the culture of this organization. We're going to change the direction of this organization. No sacred cows. No, everything is up. But when it boils down to it, we will only change the things that don't change some of the fundamental beliefs. One that I worked in is one organization I worked in. I'm not going to mention names, but that consulting must always be a secondary revenue model. So what happens is every time consulting starts becoming successful, put a roadblock in its way. Instead of let's do what's right for the customer. Sometimes it's consulting, sometimes it's a tool.
Yeah. Incidentally, there's many other organizations in that same space that's doing exactly the same. Right. and you know who I'm specifically referring to now.
Although we won't mention any names. Yeah.
We won't mention that.
And yet I went through an extensive thing. We're going to refocus our attention on the customer. We're going to re-engineer our processes. We're going to focus. Everybody is part of one big team that's all focused on the customer. Never happened. We changed some things, but we didn't change the fundamental thing. Yeah. And so, I left the organization. I just couldn't deal with it anymore. And to be honest, that's often the choice. And so, was business process reengineering a fad? Yes, it was, in a sense. Do we still re-engineer processes? Yes, we do. Mm-hmm. So to an extent, the formalized framework of digital transformation, I think, is a bit of a fad in some respects. Do I think digital transformation is going to stop happening? Absolutely not. It's going to continue to be a major, thing forward. So the question is, what technique are you going to use to do it? And again, what's really interesting to me is that a lot of digital transformation projects and specialists ignore the IT component. They focus only on the business process component. Mm. And I find that very strange. And I think if that's, well, because the idea is that the IT component has already changed, so we don't need to transform that. And that's absolutely wrong.
I think that's wrong.
Yeah.
What we tend to do is we don't talk about the technology part so much because we want to take the focus away from it. So first understand how you're going to transform. And then once we've done that, then we can say, okay, so how's the tech going to help us to do that? Yeah.
Right.
If you start with the tech, you're in trouble.
Absolutely right. And I think this is where the emergence of product teams has been really helpful, because what a product team will do is it will ensure that the IT people, the back office people, are represented on the product team, either permanently or temporarily, but they're on that product team. You cannot transform anything without having all components of what is being transformed represented.
Absolutely.
So a lot of what the business transformation or rather digital transformation projects do is they create these projects, and then they come back and they say, right, IT, here's what we're going to do. And the IT people is like, what? We've never heard of anything like this before. And suddenly there's all these impacts of this transformation program, which will increase technical debt, which will invalidate a lot of the investment that's been made in the past, which is not feasible because of it can't be supported given our current structure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, to me, a really positive thing of having product teams. And I just hope that digital transformation teams, if you have a project like this, is a truly multifunctional team. The other thing that's going to make this a fad, by the way, is the labeling of every project a digital project. And
it's a way to get budget.
Exactly. So no, this is a digital transformation. What are you doing? Well, we're upgrading the service. Yeah. Okay, it is digital. You're right, but
but how's the organization different and better for it? Right. Maybe better for it, but different. Don't know.
Don't know.
And I think the interesting thing that you said about the fact that digital transformation has been happening for decades is that once it has happened, the next time it happens, it's not transformative anymore.
Yeah, it's an application of an existing technology. It may be into a new environment. It may come under the category of innovative use, but it's certainly not innovative. It's not you're not using an innovation; it already exists. So interestingly, in the DITS book, I included something from Geoffrey Moore. Geoffrey Moore has this adoption cycle, and he has this curve. Early adopters, very few of them, and then you go up. Suddenly, this technology gets adopted, and there's a number of users goes up like this, and then it's peak use. He calls that Main Street. Everybody's doing it, and then kind of it tails off after a while.
I think he's got the bowling alley, and
he's got the bowling alley, which is
and all,
So the bowling alley is how you target one specific early adopter and get them to adopt it, and then it kind of expands from there. And but what was interesting to me is that if you look at it, it's also a good model for innovation.
Yeah.
So organizations that are on the left-hand side of that, which is the early adopter side and the innovator side.
The innovators,
Yeah, they will tend to be a lot more adventurous and a lot more. They are the ones who drive innovation. The people at the back end of that, when it gets to Main Street usage, think they're being innovative because
But
it's
all
new to them.
efficiency.
Yeah, but all they're doing is they're adopting technology. They're adopting a technology that is new to them.
Yeah.
And that's different. That's a different business model altogether. So when, and again, strategically, we want to encourage in this particular market that you should drive innovation to every level of your organization. And what that's going to do is that it's going to kind of shift organizations more towards being early adopters of technology.
But culturally, it's difficult for many organizations to do that, and that's for anybody that's sitting on the other side of the chasm, because they don't necessarily think tech is cool. They want evidence. Yeah.
No, absolutely.
So incidentally, I mean, Jeffrey Moore's stuff is actually, even though it's old, it's actually older, because diffusion of innovation was, I think, Everett Rogers, 64. That's and he already then said that these different, and he linked it to innovation, saying, this bunch of guys, this is how you innovate for them, and this bunch of guys, this is how you innovate for them. And I use that exactly virtually on a daily basis when I deal with these people in the innovation space, because unfortunately people think that all methods are equal. They're not. Certain tools work in certain contexts and others don't.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's a certain amount of experimentation that has to be done, and that requires a deliberate approach. It's not something you want to find out by accident.
Yeah.
I read an interesting stat, and I can't remember the name of the book, but it was written by somebody who was at Procter & Gamble. And has written a book about this whole digital transformation, the whole digital world and what's happening. And the point that he makes is that, and I think I get the stat right, I think he said that 80% of the Fortune 500 will not exist in 5 years' time.
Yeah, that's backed up by quite a number of different stats from.
It was interesting, and you can see it, and you're talking about organizations who are unwilling to innovate, and yet they are in an environment where the lives of their customers are defined by innovation, and but within their own organizations, they're unable to innovate, or they're unwilling to innovate.
So here's another interesting one. If you look at Jim Collins, he actually has got some stats that 70% of people who try to be too innovative actually fails, and they fail as an organization. So they fail magnificently.
Right.
So the organizations who actually gets it right are the guys who applies the Pareto principle. It's about 20% of their effort goes into these really risky type of things, but most of their innovation is actually not innovation. It's more efficiency, driving, customer satisfaction, understanding their customer better, and whatever. And I found that very, very interesting.
So it raises a question that I know that you are quite passionate about. It's the importance of governance.
Yeah. Okay. So I think you have to have a podcast with me on the governance issue, because man alive, I reckon about a good 80% of controls in organizations are bullshit and shouldn't be there. If we focus on the really important things, and incidentally, the important things are the things that provides the context between us, our customers, and our long-term survivability. And people say to me, but how can you say you have to have just enough controls? Surely you must cover for all the eventualities. No, you don't. You just have to have enough.
No, exactly.
And then if you say, but isn't that too little? I said, I didn't say have little. I said just have enough. So, oh man, it's very difficult to, yeah.
No, and yet it is so important. I made a point, I was on a presentation yesterday, and I made the point is that what did we learn from the pandemic? One of the things we learned is that governance is essential, but it's different than we thought.
Yes.
And what that meant was, what I meant by that was that when you're in the middle of a pandemic, you know, the first lockdowns and people responding to that, you know, you had to be able to empower employees to do stuff from home. And to do that, you had to break a lot of rules. And so governance in that case started to become really important. Right? Okay, so what rules are really important? You know, one of the rules, for example, one of the companies I am a customer of, I phoned them and I said, I need this. And they said, well, we'll try and do it for you, but we can't access that system because we're working from home and we're not allowed to access these systems from home.
I mean, how stupid is that?
I said, so somebody had, you know, well, somebody had made the assumption that a good security measure was co-location of resources with systems. And that the only secure system is a system that can be accessed by an internal backbone, right? Okay. Well, we have to challenge that.
I mean, so the whole world is changing.
Absolutely.
Because so what you're saying is cloud is bad and it's not secure. Yeah. So incidentally, I mean, this is something that comes from Eli Goldratt. He used to say that what happens, you know, what was that little the recipe that he uses to deal with issues? I can't remember. It was an acronym.
Yes.
So and then you. Anyway, but you know what I'm talking about. Yeah. But in any case, so here's how most controls start. Most controls start because something went wrong. Yeah.
Yes.
And because we didn't understand it, or because we didn't have the ability to prevent it, we put a control in place.
That's right.
Okay. Now that's fine. We all know and understand that. But Goldratt reminds us that the moment you actually solve the problem, you must remove the control, because then if you don't, your control becomes a constraint.
Correct.
Yeah. And tell me, how many times do we do that? And that's why I say 80% of controls in organizations are bullshit, because the reason why they were put in place no longer exists. And in fact, they're wasteful, and it prevents us from doing the right thing.
That's exactly right. And so governance in this case meant, how do we change the rules to equip the employees who are working from home to do their job?
Yeah,
that's what it became. So it was important. You had to have it. I mean, how do you get, in this case, I think it was something like 50,000 employees working from home, so that they are consistently, you know, doing the job that they have to do, that they do it in a quality way, that they achieve the how do you do that? That's governance, right? But it's also empowerment. And so, you know, they're a very different view of governance. And I want to back up your comment about 80% of controls being irrelevant. Doing a project,
how politically correct are you? Being irrelevant.
I live in America. You know, what can I say? I'm doing a project at the moment with a major cloud service provider, and I asked them, what are some of the issues that you face when working with new clients? And there was a bunch of them. One is they expect that security is our problem, not theirs, right? So, well, we're in the cloud. You say you're secure, therefore I don't have to worry about security anymore, right? No, you still have to worry about security. There are some aspects of security that you have outsourced or delegated, but you're still responsible for security. But the interesting thing was, the second thing they said is probably, and this was the figure they mentioned, we are told that the organization has constraints, that there are certain things they cannot do. And when we look at those constraints and ask them why those constraints exist, they say they are because of regulatory compliance. When we tell them to show us how they comply with the regulation, they cannot.
Okay.
And I said, how many of those constraints are false constraints? They said about 80%.
Yeah.
That people
I don't
think are there because they have to be there for compliance. But 80% of them,
there's a
who
book
knows
that
where
you
they
need
came
to
from?
read. It's a bit long-winded, but go and read it in any case. Actually, there's two long-winded books that I want you to go and read. The first one is David Gerber. I don't know if you've ever heard. Okay. And the book's name is Bullshit Jobs. And I think to a large extent, much of what we've done in service management for a long time is the bullshit job.
Yep.
And the second one that's really interesting is The Ministry of Common Sense. I can't remember the author. It's a little bit of a gripe book, but the principles are solid.
Okay. So my next podcast, I will be telling you that I read those two books.
Okay. My answer in terms of how do you fix governance is heuristics. Okay, let me translate it. Teach people common sense.
Yeah.
And you can.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stop doing stupid things, and then things won't go wrong. Yeah. I can remember in the 80s there was a major flood somewhere in the UK. Okay, and there was an elderly couple who floated out of the second story window on a door. The old man, just took a screwdriver, took the door off, and he used it as a flotation device. Yeah. Now that's somebody who grew up in the era of common sense. Just the next interview, I was in the UK or somewhere watching, obviously something like Sky or whatever. There was this young couple that was swept away in their car. And when the interviewer asked them, asked them, why did you drive into the water? He says, because nobody told us we can't.
All right.
Heuristics. Yeah.
We have too many warning signs.
Mind the gap.
Yes.
Really? Will I fall if I stick my foot in there?
Do not drink the contents of this bottle. Brake fluid.
The best one for me, David, was in the mid 90s. I bought one of the first Bosch electric paint strippers. And on the side of this thing, it wasn't even in English, it was in German. So I'm must probably butcher the German. To say something that nichts als haardroogter gebruikten. Yeah, so don't use as a hairdryer. Really?
There you are.
But
so if it's not on the warning sign, you can do it. Yeah.
But I think people are going to get bored now.
Yes.
Thank you very much for making time. I know that you're off on holiday next week.
Pleasure.
We'll definitely do it again. So I tell you what, why don't we make sure we do it the same as Kelly's Heroes every year, at least.
Let's do that. And I will watch my Jason Bourne. You can watch Kelly's Heroes, and then we'll get on this, and we'll be all pumped and ready to go.
Donald Sutherland is a tanker, and I was a tanker. So, I'm also really bad with authority, and he's bad with authority. So maybe that's why I like watching it.
Oh yeah.
Okay, brother.
Good.
Have fun.
Thanks, Johan.
Enjoy.
You too. Okay.
Cheers, man. Bye.